Welcome back, everyone. We are going to have a fun conversation today because we are discussing hard mode and difficulties in video games. Now, this is something that my friends and I have brought up countless times over the years, going back to the time that we were kids and the different games that we played. Who played that game on hard? What was it like? And we've all complained at least once in our lives when enemies just became damage sponges. Now, what I've done here is prepared a list of most major genres, and I've brainstormed what are hopefully some fun and unique ideas to improve hard mode and those harder difficulties. Over the last 24 hours, I've seen that this has become another hot topic, and so I figured, let's see what I can throw into the pot here and get everyone else talking about it. Generally speaking, I'm not a fan of scaling EXP growth. So for example, you're playing an RPG, and hard mode gives you more EXP per battle. I feel like that's way too much incentive, and people are obliged to pick hard in that situation. Because what? If I'm playing on easy or if I'm playing on normal, well, I know I'm not as good at these games. I'm going to get to the boss and I'm 20 levels lower than someone who played on hard. I don't have the same spells unlocked. I can't equip the same equipment. It's just not fair. The other thing that I want to avoid here is creating more of the same. And that's where these damage sponge enemies are a huge problem, because all you're doing is making people spend more time doing nothing new. So I want to try to introduce unique challenges, unique rewards. And we're going to go in alphabetical order here, starting with action games. Most action games have a stamina meter or an energy cost associated with your abilities, so I feel like just increasing the amount that each ability costs could be one good way of making the difficulty harder. That way you just can't be wasteful. You can't be spamming your attacks unnecessarily. Maybe the action genre is a good place where you can increase the HP of enemies slightly. I feel like typically, Breath of the Wild, for example, when developers increase the HP of enemies, they just take it way too far. Small, moderate increases are all you need to have a more fun approach to the game. A big one here is better AI, and this is something I'm going to be repeating constantly with various examples for the different genre. Better AI in an action game might look like the enemies have greater distance management. So you're not always going to have enemies that are right up against you, and then you're hitting 2 or 3 of them with an AoE attack. Maybe some of the enemies, if you're not locked onto them, they back off a little bit, and they force you into these one-on-one engagements. Enemies also need to flank you more in these games. How many times are you just facing forward and there's a semicircle of enemies? I feel like the Arkham games do a bit of a better job at this. And then maybe something you could do on the harder difficulties there in the Arkham games is even as these enemies are behind you, they can have increased attack rates. They just throw their attacks more often. And the last thing I wrote here for action games is another maybe, an extra enemy in the encounters. Again, this is just something that developers need to find the right balance for. Don't go from 4 to 8 enemies. Don't just double everything unnecessarily. Go from 4 to 5 enemies in an encounter, 5 to 6. For the adventure genre, I feel like this is usually paired with other genres, action adventure, RPG adventure, etc. And so take what I'm going to say for those other genres and apply it here. However, there's one thing that you could start to do with the adventure genre, and I did write this for the other games too, but it's introducing bonus objectives. So in an adventure game where exploration is a key component of the gameplay, incentivize players to go explore those other parts of the world, right? And it doesn't take that much. It could be in the form of a side quest, and if the exploration is worthwhile, if you're going to see all these amazing sights along the way, then usually that is enough of a reward. In a more simplified game, maybe something with pixel art, and you don't think that you can distinguish the different backgrounds and environments enough, then you got to get creative. You might need some sort of reward, even if it's just a note from the developer or a note from an in-game character congratulating you for finding that location. And I didn't have this written down, but cosmetics. Start to introduce costumes to the game. That way, you don't feel like if you're a beginner player or a casual player, you're missing out. It doesn't impact your stats at all. It just makes the better players look cooler. Fighting games. Now, I'm not so good at them, but they're still fun to talk about. I feel like increased HP can be okay here. And I guess if I'm allowing some increased HP, then sure, I'm also allowing you to tweak the damage values, but let's just stick to one thing to keep it simple. Better AI here, absolutely. Try to make the enemies fight more like humans, a little more aggressive, a little more blocking, just more refined play styles. And bonus challenges. Now, I actually thought of Final Fantasy Tactics Advance for this one with the law system. And in that game, if you're unfamiliar with it, When you enter a battle, there could be a condition barring you from using certain abilities, or it doesn't let your characters go to the high ground, or you can only deploy one less character on the battlefield. What about in a fighting game story mode on hard, every stage has a different challenge that you have to overcome. No fireballs, no blocking, no moving backwards. Okay, maybe that's a little too much, but you get the idea, right? This is where developers need to get more creative and need to have more fun ideas. First-person shooters, and I'm including third-person shooters here as well. I've got one of my best suggestions in this list for the end of this section, so wait for that one. Let's just go over the other ones for now. Again, a lot of them have to do with AI, so enemies using cover, reacting to your weapons. Halo does this. On Legendary, if you throw a grenade, enemies are more likely to dive out of the way. That's fantastic. Enemies flanking you, so I talked about that with the action games. Absolutely, it applies with shooters too. I would say be careful when you're increasing damage. Now, I played the 2 Call of Duty 4 games. I beat them both on Veteran when I was a teenager and had nothing better to do. I really shudder at the thought of having to redo that experience because it wasn't an FPS anymore. Those enemies and the increased damage that they have on Veteran and just the enemy placement, it's not about having quick reflexes or getting headshots or anything like that. It's about learning enemy placement through trial and error and trying to problem solve your way out of a certain destination. It becomes like a puzzle game. So I'm not a fan of that for FPS necessarily. I think you also want to be careful with simply deploying more enemies per combat because you don't want every combat to feel the same. If you have fewer enemies, not adding less on hard mode, but just relatively speaking, if you have fewer enemies in an area and you strategically place them instead, then the player is forced to use cover in different ways. Then it's not simply hanging back as far as you can with your most powerful weapons and patiently taking down everyone from afar. The other one I would caution, the last one to caution here, is limited ammo. I don't feel like it works well in Halo. There were some fights that are, pretty epic as a kid, when you have to keep on going through the various dropped weapons from your enemies, but then you get to one of the big, strong, beefy things, you run out of ammo on both your weapons, and it's just 5 minutes of running away and trying to melee it to death. Again, really fun as a kid, something that you remember, but I don't feel like it's a mark of good game design. Now for a few more positive additions. Introducing enemies with weaknesses, or introducing weaknesses to existing enemies. So let's say there's an enemy and you can see he's got some sort of shimmer on him. It's clear he has an energy shield. On normal, let's say the energy shield mitigates 50% of your damage. And on hard mode, it could mitigate 80% of your damage. So that's one where the EMP grenade to reduce their shields would be even more effective. Bonus objectives. Now, Perfect Dark on the N64 actually had these. When you played on Perfect Agent, I think that's what it was called, you had more things that you had to get done per mission. Well, I'm taking that idea, and this is my best suggestion for FPS. Let's say you're playing a World War II military shooter, and you know that on hard mode, the last fight of the level has more enemies, and they've got turrets, they've got a couple of shields in front of their turrets, whatever it is. You know that it's going to be a really challenging fight if you just head straight for it. So, on hard mode, have these bonus objectives off to the side of the map, and when you go clear out the enemies there, there's a hidden weapons cache for your reward. Now you can pick up a grenade launcher, now you can pick up a rocket launcher, or whatever it is, and that should make your time with the last fight that much easier. But again, you have to keep in mind the casual player. So do you have that same weapons cache somewhere else on the map for a casual? That's where I leave it to the developers. I'm not going to go into more detail than that, but special weapons caches to help you overcome harder challenges. Not to trivialize them, just to give you a fighting chance. All right, now we're talking about platformers. So, in a game like the Mario series, where you collect 100 coins to get an extra life, how about just more coins or points to get more lives? Instead of 100, it's 120. Now, you have to think of what do your lives do versus your continues. Are there even any continues? Again, I'm going to leave those details for the developers. I just thought of that one quickly. No checkpoints. Fair enough. You should have enough skill and expertise to get through a level from start to finish. You could die a couple of times, but you're not allowed to pause halfway through the level. Less time per level. It's funny, in the last video I uploaded, somebody pointed out how it never really made sense in the Mario games that you're working against a timer anyways. Like, what happens? Why do you just randomly die? But in the 2D platformers that still have timers, less time per level, maybe upgraded versions of enemies. I feel like you have to be a little cautious of this in 2D platformers. For example, if you have a Koopa, you don't necessarily want to have a Koopa with a spike on its head on hard. And now the challenge is completely different, and you have to be careful that doesn't become nigh impossible. 3D platformers, I feel like there's a little more wiggle room there. And speaking of 3D platformers, more hazards. This is where you can get away with more spike platforms, just longer jumps, or jumps that require a little more skill to do, a little more wall bouncing, whatever it is. Again, I leave the details up to the developers. That's just my idea. And of course, the most fun are always optional routes. So there's an easy path to get through a level, and there's a hard path through the level. That's something that isn't implemented by having a hard mode. That's just something that you make a game, no difficulties that you choose from, but players who are more skilled get a slightly different experience that way. The puzzle genre, one of my favorites. So, faster play, obviously, in something like a Tetris Attack where you're versus an opponent. You just want them to go a little bit faster. You want them to do more combos, to clear things out in a smarter way. That's already been done, and I feel like it's the right way to do it. Optional puzzles and optional objectives. I feel like these are more appropriate for environmental puzzle games, and I don't want to tread on any developer's creative ideas. I don't want to tread on their vision. If they have an idea that, nope, you are expected to get better as you play the game, and everyone's going to beat the game the same way, like in The Witness, who am I to tell them not to do that? I've already made a video where I said not every game is for every person, and The Witness, I feel like, is an example of a harder puzzle game that not everyone's going to be able to beat. So I'm not going to say that there should be two puzzle types, one puzzle type and one route for people who want to beat the game the hard way, and then another puzzle type or route for people who want to beat the game the easy way. If you can't do it, you can't do it. It is what it is. Racing games, very simple, better AI, right? Don't make cars faster than they go for you. Don't involve things like rubber banding, just better driving. They take more optimal turns on courses or whatever it may be. Maybe something like in the Mario Kart style racing game, you could have fewer power-ups. And I don't mean on the length of the track. If there are 3 different points in the race where you can obtain power-ups, don't reduce that to 2, but think about how they're usually spread out in a line, all those power-up boxes. Instead of having 5 all the way across, only put 2 on the left side, or only put 2 on the right side. And I realize that the camera is mirrored, so my left is not your left. But you get what I'm saying. Instead of having 5 all the way across, now you know that as you come into that bend, you have to veer towards the outside if you want to get a power-up. Rhythm games. Again, not that much to say about this genre. Tighter windows. So if you're playing on an easy mode, I feel like the song should still be the same. You could have more notes in a hard difficulty. The song should be close enough, right? Don't leave out any major parts of the melody or anything like that. But instead of a window that's close to half a second for an easy mode, on hard you want it to be like, within 0.2 seconds, your reaction time. RPGs. Ooh, there's a lot to talk about with RPGs. And this is where I think one of my better suggestions lies as well. But I'll save that till the end of the RPG section. Let's start off with things like extra enemy moves. So in a game like Pokemon, where Pokemon only have a limit of 4 moves, this is not possible. Maybe instead of having 3 moves, which some Champion or Elite Four Pokemon have in some of the games, everybody has a full moveset of 4. What I'm talking about, though, is a Final Fantasy boss, or a Final Fantasy enemy even. Doesn't have to be a boss encounter. They might have a move that is only turned on, that they can only use in hard mode. It could be Thunder. It could be Poison, something to inflict a status ailment. And speaking of status ailments, I feel like more status ailments from the enemies would be appropriate for harder modes. I get really annoyed when your whole party becomes inflicted with something. Anyways, that's a different video. Okay, back on track. Maybe for the player, increased spell costs. This goes back to the action games when I suggested maybe have increased energy costs or stamina costs. Maybe it's an extra 2 mana or 5 mana or whatever it is that your mana bar works well with. Maybe you also adjust the buying and selling prices of items at shops. So I think this could work more in the Elder Scrolls, more in The Witcher, not so much in a lot of the Japanese games, although maybe something like a Dragon Quest, it still works there, where, you know what, when you get to the shop, you just can't buy as many potions, you can't buy as many antidotes. But again, do it in such a way so that you're not forcing a player to grind too much extra. In an RPG, maybe a little bit of grinding is okay, but you don't want to punish somebody and make them spend 30 minutes grinding every time they get to a new town. All that does is tack on unnecessary time. My favorite suggestion for RPGs, periodic super bosses with unique rewards. This is something that we see in Bug Fables a little bit. When you beat chapters 3 or 4 or whatever it is, you get these missions that you can take on to go take on optional bosses. And some of them have really wicked rewards. You don't need to beat them to beat the game. What I'm thinking here with these periodic super bosses, as you finish an arc or whatever the game is made up of, chapters, some super boss becomes available. There's no way a basic player or a newbie is going to be able to take on that super boss. But maybe you, with your better strategies and your more tweaked characters, they're min-maxed or something, you can go take on this super boss, and it might give you a recipe. And that recipe could be for an item that doesn't help you beat the main game, but it could help you take on the next super boss, and so on and so forth. So just a little bit of optional bonus content. Again, I feel like you don't want to be unfair to the worst players. You don't want to lock them out of cool armor, cool equipment, and you also want to avoid giving up rewards that are too good for the better players, because you don't want to trivialize future combat. We're almost done. I've got a couple more genres. Simulation is next. And maybe you do the adjusted shop prices that I mentioned last time. It could work in something like an Animal Crossing or Stardew Valley or Harvest Moon. Again, it's a maybe. I haven't thought of it that thoroughly, so I'm just putting it out there like that. Stricter conditions for objectives. So if a plant requires a certain moisture level in its soil to grow, or for you to get a super quality or super rarity of something, you just make the conditions a little stricter. Not impossible, not even close to impossible, but you just tighten up those margins a little bit. And related to that, shorter deadlines. So typically in these games, you might go to a quest board, a notice board, and you take on some sort of side quest for a side character. Hey, I would love it if you could drop off 3 carrots by tomorrow afternoon. Well, it's going to be tonight instead. Or instead of a week in advance, it's going to be 4 days out. Wrapping up with strategy games. Now you've got a couple strategy games to consider. You've got tactical strategy games like your Fire Emblems, and you've got real-time strategy games like your Age of Empires, your StarCraft. So, better formations. This applies to both types of strategy games. In StarCraft, for example, you just want the AI to be a little bit better so that they'll position their melee units in front of their range units ahead of time so that when you clash with your two armies, they're not still running their melee units out to meet you. That's a really easy one to do, I think. Better building placement. Depending on the RTS that you're playing, typically what you'll do is you'll arrange your structures in such a way so that some of them act as barricades, and the enemies don't have a straight path to get to your workers or your harvesters. Another thing that you could do is add extra towers. If you're doing a campaign and it's a mission with a fixed enemy base, then you can't just fly in from the east side of the map. There's going to be some turrets that shoot from ground to air and intercept you. So you have to be a little more clever and a little more tactical about how you break the enemy base. Finally, slightly stronger and upgraded armies. So you don't want to break the game's mechanics. You don't want to give the AI anything that you aren't capable of getting for yourself. But in a campaign level, where on normal, an enemy unit is not upgraded at all, on the hard version, they already have 1 armor or 1 extra attack. Very simple, but these things go a long way to changing the gameplay in strategy games. That is the end of my list of suggestions. I did not get to talk about dungeon crawlers, horror games, roguelikes, shooters, sports games, stealth games, and survival games. So if there's anything that you want to say about those, go right ahead. You want to talk about the best and worst examples of hard modes? The floor is yours. If you even just want to say post games are enough, and everyone can have the same experience up to the end of the main story, and then it's the post game that opens it up for more challenge, that's fine with me. Look, we have come a long way since the days of the arcade and the NES games where the only thing that you could do for more challenge was try to get a high score. I'm okay with developers not even having different difficulty settings. I'm okay still with some developers. It's not going to be great. It's not going to be ideal. But if people still get it wrong, it's not the end of the world. You play on hard and the enemies are still damaged sponges. The only thing that really annoys me is, again, what I mentioned at the very beginning of the video, where I feel like I'm obliged to play on hard because that has the best rewards and that has the greater experience growth. And then anyone who plays on easy or normal, they feel like they're missing out. So I'll just reiterate, be smart with your challenges, be smart with your rewards, and have some fun experimenting with how you vary the challenges. That's it. Once more, looking forward to talking to everyone in the comments section. And if you're someone who wants to stay quiet, I'll just see you in the next video. Thanks again. Bye-bye.